proximity of a market for foodstuffs. It might also mean being able to grow home produce. In any case, anyone who lives in an area liable to flooding should try to be self-sufficient by keeping a cottage garden with basic vegetables and herbs. For some villages, when the floods come, if the government doesn't airlift food supplies within 2 or 3 days, the whole village will starve. These would be the villages where people can't be bothered to grow their own vegetables. Similarly, places that only plant cash crops like maize lose everything as soon as the floods arrive. So just having a few vegetables like onions in the garden can allow people to get by for a whole month while emergency services try to reach them. Availability of the food at the neighborhood level might mean the proximity of the house to a fresh food market. Conducive food supply on the household level would mean having a good cook in the house, the human heart of any successful kitchen. Even if our partner neglects the children, is useless at receiving guests, and is clueless about the household finances, but if they know how to make a tasty meal, this can be their redeeming quality. Anybody who thinks they can survive on convenience foods and takeaways should think about all the flavor enhancers they put in commercial products. This is why everyone should learn to make homemade food. If you don't know how to cook at least one good thing well, then go out and take an evening class in basic cooking. I suppose you could say that the Great British Bake Off is trying to create worthy heroes in this respect. Being able to cook becomes especially important when you have to take care of someone who is sick or lonely or anxious, who has lost their appetite. When you're able to make an appetizing meal, it really makes a difference to them. I'm not saying that we ought to be obsessed with food, as sometimes is the case for some Thai people, but since none of us are like crocodiles, seals, or dinosaurs that can snack on rocks, and I mean that seriously because they have a special name for such rocks, they're called gastroliths, having a diet that is conducive to us is a plus point to our environment. So let's turn from the subject of food to look instead at the quality of people in our location. The various characteristics of a location, whether good or bad, are only minor compared with the characteristics of the people who live there. Even if the general characteristics of a location are abysmal, and the place is inhabited by virtuous people, then the drawbacks of the location can be overcome. On the other hand, in a good location with housing and employment prospects, if the inhabitants are dishonest, however beautiful the buildings, it can be no better than a den of thieves. If the inhabitants are peaceful and well-mannered like monks, then the buildings are a refuge as good as a temple. At the national level, conducive personnel means a population who uphold right livelihood. It means a population that lacks gangs, terrorists, or extortionists who threaten the solidarity of the country. The local level, if the population are overly materialistic, society will not be a very happy one. At the neighborhood level, in addition to those who earn an honest living, there must be those who make a direct contribution to the well-being of those around them. Qualified doctors are necessary in any society. Without them, every minor ailment will be life-threatening. Even if economics are good, without affordable healthcare, a society can never be considered to have conducive personnel. Also necessary for a conducive society are patrons and benefactors. Patrons and benefactors arise in a society where there is trading. Buddha arose at a time in history when India was shifting from a subsistence agrarian society to a mercantile one. Those upgrading to a mercantile society reap the benefit of having surplus capital to share around. If you don't believe me, compare this to a society where everyone lives from hand to mouth, and you will realize how hard it would be for a society with no economic slack to become conducive to the study of Dharma. In the time of the Buddha, if a king decided to establish a new city, even if he had plenty of builders and planners, without a benefactor or patron for the new project, the king wouldn't dare to perform the groundbreaking. In the modern day parlance, such people might be known as investors. In this connection, there is an account in the Dhammapada commentary about when King Pasenti built the new city of Saket too. That king had to enlist the help of the Buddha to persuade another king, Bimbisara, to lend him a major investor to help establish the new city. King Bimbisara allowed a man called Dhananjaya to be the patron to the new city, and before long, the patron got all the finances of the city properly organized, and Saket became one of the most prosperous city-states in India at that time. This goes to show that a conducive location doesn't just consist of buildings, but it needs the presence of conducive neighbors willing to invest in their fellows. The reason that having a patron was so important, apart from being a capitalist who would stimulate trade and growth, is that they would act as an economist to help with financial planning, so the new city would not spend beyond its means. In addition to doctors and investors, a conducive location would also need wise ones in its community. Many of the reasons for the importance of the wise have already been covered in blessing number 2. In brief, though, the wise have a special discretion which allows them to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong, what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, what is meritorious and what is unwholesome. Even if a person is illiterate, but they can tell the difference between right and wrong, then they can still be considered a wise one. Therefore, if you are choosing a place to live, avoid choosing a place where no wise ones are forthcoming, because in such a place, it would not be conducive to the study of the Dharma. Lastly, apart from doctors, investors, and the wise, a conducive place would ideally have a righteous ruler who is established in the 10 virtues of a monarch. Without going into detail, it can be said that a qualifying monarch must be just and moral. I don't mean to say that monarchy is required to make a conducive place to live. A conducive place could equally be a republic led by a virtuous president. Conducive personnel at the level of the household means the grown-ups in any household must be virtuous. Parents should refrain from alcohol and gambling, for example. Both should conform with right livelihood. Meanwhile, their children should be earnest in their studies and should be compliant with their parents' advice. In this way, the household will be united as the smallest unit of a much larger conducive society. Lastly, apart from conducive location, conducive food, and conducive personnel, a place is made conducive by the culture or principles which governs the lifestyle of the people who live in that place. This is known as conducive Dhamma. At the national level, conducive Dhamma in a society means the governing principles of law and order by which the society abides. Conducive Dharma is lacking from countries where gangs run amok, for example. At a deeper level, conducive Dhamma equates with national culture and traditions that celebrate and is grateful for virtues. Although the law protects society from physical and verbal acts of unwholesomeness, those laws cannot directly upgrade the quality of people's minds. A positive ethos derives instead from the culture or traditions of that place. A child's respect for parents and teachers is an example of ethos that leads to betterment of the mind. For as long as such traditions are still perpetuated and passed down from one generation to the next in any particular society, then that society will remain a conducive place to live. By contrast, you should avoid going to live in a barbaric society when people have no respect for each other's dignity, where, for example, in primitive societies, leadership potential is measured in terms of excelling in cruel deeds. At a yet deeper level, conducive Dhamma in society means a good educational system which allows the citizens to make a thorough study of both worldly and spiritual matters, where both schools and temples from the educational infrastructure of society and all citizens are equipped with sufficient rationale not to be gullible. Deeper still, Buddhist teaching should be well rooted in that country. The Buddhist saint Padmasambhava said in the Tibetan Book of the Dead that when people are entranced by the pointless activities in life and are confused about their purpose in life, then they will leave this world empty-handed. The main reason they leave this world empty-handed is because they cannot distinguish between good and bad deeds. They just do whatever pleases them. They might consider their life's work to be no more than survival of the species. It has to be said that even though some people are born on the doorstep of Buddhism, they still leave the world empty-handed. So what chance do other people stand who have never encountered Buddhism and the Buddhist methodologies for cultivating benefit for this lifetime and the next? Where standing financially on your own 2 feet would be considered benefit in the present lifetime, and accumulating merit in the mind to guide one onto a better spiritual destiny after death would be considered benefit for the next lifetime. Without knowledge of the methodologies of Buddhism, all a person can do is use up the merits accrued from previous lifetimes. So to come back to the meaning of conducive Dhamma on different levels, at the national level, it would mean having just laws and customs as the national identity. Conducive Dhamma teachings on the neighborhood level, for children anyway, would mean having a good school nearby. If our children have the chance to study at a decent school, they will have a head start in life. Conducive Dhamma for grown-ups on the neighborhood level means having a good temple near at hand. And the very least, if there's a temple nearby our house, there will be monks who pass on their alms round, and we will have the opportunity to make the merit of generosity every morning. If you want to listen to a Dhamma talk, then we won't have to travel too far. The level of the household, conducive Dhamma means an atmosphere of enthusiasm for Dharma learning and teaching in the home, whether it be the Dharma discussion at mealtimes or parents setting an example to their children of Dharma practice. So just before we settle for some meditation, we have time for a quick Dhamma story to illustrate the power of one's spiritual destiny of living in a conducive location. The story comes from a 14th century chronicle called the Saddhamma Sangaha Vakuli Watu by a monk from Ayodhya named Dhammakiti. He tells us that in the time of a previous Buddha, there was a monk who had retired to a cave in order to train himself in meditation. The monk would rise early each morning and chant the Abhidhamma, which is the chanting we normally use for funerals in the present day. The monk shared the cave with about 500 bats. And during the day, the bats would return to the cave, but at night they would fly elsewhere to feed. Accordingly, the bats would hear the chanting of the Abhidhamma every day. Even though the bats had no way of knowing the meaning of the chanting, they became familiar with the sound and became inspired with faith. When it came to time for the bats to pass away, they died with faith in their hearts and were all reborn as angels. Passing away from their existence as angels, they were reborn as human beings in the time of the present Buddha. All 500 became ordained as monks, and hearing the chanting of the Abhidhamma only once, unlike usual people who might remain indifferent to the chanting even if they hear it many times, well, those ex-bats could remember the words of the Abhidhamma, which were still impressed in their minds from the previous lifetime, and recollecting the words of the Abhidhamma were soon able to become enlightened as arahants. So, the message of the story is that living in a conducive location is not only advantageous for people, but even humble animals can experience the benefits. But now, with a view to cultivating the qualities of conducive location within ourselves, let's take a break halfway for some meditation, which today is entitled Meditation on the Elements. So this time we settle ourselves down for 20 minutes of meditation. If you'd like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself now as you listen to my guidance. So we start by sitting up straight. Whether we're sitting on a meditation mat or on a chair, we try to have our back elongated. And close our eyes, allowing the whole of our body to relax, beginning with the muscles of our face, then our shoulders, our arms, down to the tips of our fingers. We relax our torso, both legs, all the way down to the tips of our toes, allowing the whole of our body to rest more and more. We're able to relax ourselves. It's like permitting our whole body to be still and permitting every single part of our body not to be doing anything anymore. Just remaining in stillness. Also, we relax our state of mind, putting aside any worries or concerns, conjuring up a sense of happiness and joy inside us. The meditation on the inner elements that we will be doing today is what's known as a samatha or calming meditation. But as it's the very last meditation in the list of the 40 ways of meditating in the Path of Purity Manual of Meditation, it has rather more details to it than some of the other meditation that we might be used to. But it's like a reflection on the assumption that you are your body, or your body is you. And we're going to probe a little at those assumptions and start to see how much of what we take to be us is not in fact who we really are. The object of meditation on the inner elements is to contemplate the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind in the body. To free the mind from attachment to self, me, myself, mine. In the Buddhist scriptures of the Majjhima Nikaya, whether it be the greater discourse on the elephant's footprint, the greater discourse of advice to Rahula, or the analysis of the elements, it's advocated that we mentally deconstruct the body into the 4 elements as a way to reduce our attachment to the physical aspect of our existence and to understand clearly the fundamental nature of the body without thinking about the differences between individuals. It's generally a meditation suited to people with a tendency to overthink things. So to start to let go of the attachment to this body, we consider it in terms of the 4 great elements, or Jattaro Mahabhutani, namely earth, water, fire, and air. We reflect on these 4 elements as they appear in the body until they're seen as just a bunch of elements no different in nature from the elements in inanimate objects outside of ourselves. Traditionally, there were 42 signs of the elements in the body, 20 for the earth element, especially Gesa, Loma, Nakadanta, Tacho, of the formulaic meditation given to each new monk on the day of their ordination. We continue with 12 for the water element, 4 for the fire element, and 6 for the air element. But today we'll do it in a more informal manner, just enough to let go of attachment to this body of ours, so that we can meditate more deeply. So we begin by becoming aware of what's known as the earth element internally. the earth element in the body. And what this is everything solid and resistant in the body. You can start to notice the more immediate sensations of solidity and contact. Noticing things like perhaps the feet in contact with the floor or your seat, your hands resting on your lap, or any other experiences of solid contact. You can feel your tongue in contact with your teeth, generally noticing the solidity of the body. You can notice the muscles all over the body, legs, arms, trunk and neck, all over the face and head. You can notice your teeth, finger and toenails. There are also the organs that you can't sense directly, that are also the earth element, like the brain, the lungs, the heart, the liver and the kidneys. So we just give ourselves a sense that, yes, okay, there's this body here, it's solid. This is what I think of as being me. And then moving on within the earth element, we become aware of the earth element outside of ourselves. In fact, the earth element inside the body is no different in nature from the earth element in inanimate objects outside of ourselves. And all of it is borrowed. You didn't make any of the matter in your body. And furthermore, it's of a nature of suffering, impermanence, and it is not our true self. So as you're aware now of this solid mass, the mass of this body that you take to be me, mine, just observe the body and drop those phrases in that this is not me, this is not mine, I am not this. Next we move on to the water element. The water element is whatever liquid or semi-liquid is inside our body. This is the water element internally. So you can notice some of this directly, the saliva in our mouth, the film of tears covering the surface of our eyes. You might feel moistness where parts of your body are in contact with one another. And you can feel the blood pulsing through your body. There are other forms of liquid in the body that we can't directly sense, but we know they're there. Things like bile, lymph fluid, synovial fluid, digestive juices. You can just be aware that this entire body is saturated in water, maybe 60 to 65% liquid. Even fat, by the way, is considered traditionally being a part of the water element. In fact, the water element inside the body is no different in nature from the water element in inanimate objects outside of ourselves. It's of a nature of suffering, impermanence, and it's not our true self. So we become aware of the nature of the water element inside our body just by dropping in the phrases, this is not me, this is not mine, I am not this. And the next element is the fire element. And the fire element is how the ancients referred to the functioning of the metabolism, life, the activity of living beings. It maintains digestion and movement and everything associated with being alive. So you can be aware of the warmth in your body. Notice that the body is warm. You may feel some coolness in the air around you, and that's just the feeling of heat escaping from your body. The out-breath is warm compared to the cooler in-breath. And you can notice the heart beating. That's energy. Notice the body moving as you breathe in and you breathe out. You might be aware of the digestive processes, and you can feel the pulse in different parts of the body, perhaps in your hands, in your legs, or in your feet. And there's just that aliveness, the fact that you're sensing energy flowing through sensory nerves, bringing signals to your brain. The brain sending out little signals to motor neurons, to muscles all over your body. And we just have this feeling of aliveness, and this is the fire element internally. And again, if you start to look at it closely, there is no internal versus external fire element. In fact, the fire element inside the body is no different in nature from the fire element in inanimate objects outside of ourselves. So the nature of suffering, impermanence, it's not our true self. So just being aware of this pulsing, tingling, breathing, energetic body by dropping in the phrases, this is not me, this is not mine, I am not this. Moving on, the next of the inner elements is the air element, which is what it sounds like. It's the gaseous components of the body, breath that dissolves in the bloodstream. You become aware of this body is saturated with dissolved gases, gases filling the lungs and the airways. In fact, the air element inside the body is no different in nature from the air element in inanimate objects outside of ourselves. It is all of a nature of suffering, impermanence, and it's not our true self. We become aware of the nature of the air element in our body just by dropping in the phrases, this is not me, this is not mine, I am not this. And having let go of the attachment for the body, we have to accept before proceeding that the traditional way of cultivating meditation on the four elements, Ojjato, Dhatu, Vatana, is limited in its potential and can only get you as far as neighborhood concentration or Upajjara Samadhi. It doesn't have the power to access attainment concentration or Appana Samadhi. In order to gain access to higher meditational attainments, including attainment of the Dhammakaya, we need to follow the advice of the great abbot of Wat Phak Nam by reflecting on the four elements at the center of the body until the mind comes to a standstill and can attain the sphere of Patamamaka. This development of the elemental meditation requires 6 elements in place of 4. And having reduced attachments to our ego, it can help our mind more easily to make its way towards inner peace. The great abbot of Wat Phak Nam, Phra Mongkol Tepuni, interpreted these 4 great elements as refined elements perceived as elemental spheres within the body. Not 4 because they are inanimate, but 6 elements for living conscious matter. We consider the 6 elements inside ourselves through meditation as inner spheres. And the way they're located in relation to the center of the body. The great abbot of Wat Phak Nam taught that near to the center of the body there are 6 centers, to the front, to the back, to the left, to the right, around the center and the center itself. Where the center to the front is that of the cohesive or fluid element, the water element. To the right is the solid element or the earth element. The center behind the center of the body is the combustible element or fire element. The center to the left of the body is of the nature of mobility and is the air or wind element. The center surrounding but concentric to the center of the body is the vacuous element or the element of space. And lastly, at the center of the space element is the human mind, which has been described as the element of consciousness. This human element of consciousness comprises the four functions of perception, memory, thought, and cognition. So to upgrade meditation on the elements to attainment level of appana samadhi, when considering the four elements present in the body, we need for our reflection on the elements to lead the mind to become calm and concentrated to a point where it is still at the center of the body. Without bringing the mind to the center, to the point of attainment of patamamaka, until attaining the inner bodies, the quality of meditation cannot move from neighborhood concentration up to the level of access concentration, let alone insight meditation. So for this reason, we just keep calm at the center, and with this in mind, we consider the remaining two elements at the center of the body. So we turn our attention to the fifth of the elements, the element of space inside the body. We might think of this as the space that we occupy, so just becoming aware as best we can of the space we occupy. Maybe kind of fuzzy, sort of strange. When we look at the body, we see defined edges. When you feel the body from the inside, it's hard to tell where your body ends and the outside world begins. So you're occupying this space, this me-shaped space. And as with all the other elements, we can be aware of all the space that's outside this me-shaped space. It's a little overwhelming perhaps, because there's a lot of it. So you go to your center and the feeling there. As you're sitting, being aware of this inner space that you call me, mine, and the sensations arising within that inner space, you reflect that the space element inside the body is no different in nature from the space element in inanimate objects outside of yourself. So the nature of suffering, impermanence, and it's not our true self. So we become aware of the space element in our body by just dropping in the phrases at our center: this is not me, this is not mine, I am not this. And then finally we become aware of the consciousness element. So consciousness is not a thing, it's a process of knowing, of experiencing. In fact, the consciousness element inside the body is no different in nature from the consciousness element in other animate objects outside of ourselves. So the nature of suffering, impermanence, and it's not our true self. So we become aware of the nature of the consciousness element in our body by just dropping in the phrases: this is not me, this is not mine, I am not this. But although consciousness is just a mundane life-giving element, it does present a pathway to higher aspects of ourselves that are of a nature of happiness, eternity, and our true self, something we can truly consider our own. So having aligned our mind with the inner subtle space of consciousness at the center of the body, the mind will know exactly where to go. Sometimes we don't even have to use the breath. At this point we slowly and gently conjure up a point of reference in the mind by touching very gently with our mind at the center, until a picture of the midday sun or the full moon, a star, a diamond, or perhaps a crystal ball or a candle flame appears. We continue to observe that imaginary object as a ball of bright light. The inner object will mark the center spot. Observe the inner object, accepting the way it comes into view, even if it's not entirely clear. There's no point in putting up a struggle to get the inner image the way we want. The point is to observe and accept the inner object, anchoring the mind as it is. And for now, the mind continues to stay gently in touch with the bright inner object at the center of ourselves. As the mind becomes more settled, the brightness of the inner object will expand to become wider. Meanwhile, the mind remains still at the same spot. So we continue to allow the brightness of our inner object to spread outwards in all directions, spreading above and below, to the front and the back, to the right and the left, purifying and clarifying all the subtle elements in our body and mind. In the meantime, our point of observation is not from a place outside the center, but actually from inside the center, as if we were radiating our awareness outwards with an inner brightness. Generally, we only feel things touching us from the outside. But in our meditation today, we have the novel experience of feeling sensation as if from the inside out. The mind continues to align itself exactly with the center space inside the abdomen. It will slowly align itself with that point inside us like a tiny sail making its way across the ocean to the far shore, slowly, softly, quietly, making its way to the center space. In the same way, our mind is touching at the center in a very soft, subtle manner. If you think about the amount of effort involved with touching, you realize it's far lighter than putting or placing something. It doesn't involve taking the weight of that object. The way the mind approaches the center is more like touching than putting or placing. It needs to be delicate, like a tiny white feather floating gently to the earth. In the same way, the mind floats down to touch at the center space, and we observe it there as it continues to touch the center. All we need to do for now is to wait. The inner element of consciousness at the center, in addition to the peace energy, will take care of the mind. The only way to reach toward a healthy mind, a mind that has cleansed and purified all the inner elements, is to allow the mind to come to a standstill at the tiny point of consciousness and wait for the energy to cleanse the inner elements. In the meantime, we stay still, we wait. We don't have to do anything. All we do is wait. Since the body is motionless, little by little, we begin to relax. We remain in the moment while the peace energy takes care of our precious mind. No one is in a hurry. We just let the mind slow down in its own time. And while we're waiting, we try to keep it simple. Whatever experience arises, we observe and accept. Observing means we're fully aware of any experience. Accepting means that we don't elaborate on the experience. We accept whatever arises with an uncomplicated mind. This is the secret of waiting, to observe and to accept. So for now, let us observe and accept our inner experience for a little longer, with a sense of having all the time in the world, as we gently coax the mind toward a standstill. By means of waiting, the mind becomes even more settled than before. The mind starts to feel less cluttered and less congested. The peace energy gradually works to purify and clarify the elements in the mind. In fact, we cannot intentionally declutter our mind. We have to allow it to take place by itself. All we can do is to set up the conditions and let them run to completion. As the peace energy flows into our mind and gradually accumulates, there will be a feeling of expansion, and the body will start to feel lighter. If anything new happens in the mind, we just let it be. If our attention is drawn away to things outside our center, we will only be able to observe them in a single dimension. Do we keep our awareness in the center and allow the awareness to broaden and expand from there? We can observe our surroundings in all dimensions at once. The benefits of cultivating meditation on the inner elements as we've done today include that we will appreciate the three universal characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and not-self. You'll be able to let go of attachment to the fixed aspects of our physical identity, such as gender or species. Be able to overcome our fear of danger, especially from predators higher up the food chain, paving the way for our attainment of enlightenment. Be able to let go of attachment to tasks in our life and to sensual obsessions. We won't be carried away by extreme emotions and moods. We'll be endowed with extensive intelligence and will be able to attain inner peace. But in the meantime, we will arise only in the human and celestial realms. But in the meantime, we need to learn to be at ease with our elements. We need to learn only to observe and to accept. We need to reduce the tendency of our mind to question everything. Every time we find we're entertaining a question in the mind, it only causes a loss of quality in the mind. So it's better just to let the questions go. Keep the mind simple, in touch with the peace energy at the center. To develop a new feeling, a new level of consciousness, allowing peace energy to radiate forth from the center for a few more moments in silence. Sappa Buddhanupavena, Sappa Dhammanupavena, Sappa Sanghanupavena, Sattha Soti Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So returning to the subject matter of Buddhist Feng Shui for today, let's see if, having studied the four main principles of a location that make it conducive to spiritual transformation, we have at the same time discovered a recipe for success in choosing a location of a new house. In the olden days, no one would dare to build a new house without first seeking the advice of a teaching monk, or at the very least from a fortune teller. The oracle in question would always advise them on what to look for in the lie of the land. For example, to have a mountain behind it and a water source in front. In fact, the most successful oracles are not interested in the lie of the land at all, but were interested in how many of the four principles of conducive location were present in the proposed site of the new house. If you want to have a crash course in predicting the feng shui of a prospective new house, you might start by drawing up a grid with a column for each of the four factors of conducive location. Once you've drawn up the grid, supposing you're planning to move into a new place and you have to decide between several locations, then award points to each of the different locations according to the four factors: location, food, personnel, and Dhamma. Give each factor points out of 25. When you add up the total points for each different location, you'll be able to get a percentage conduciveness rating for each of the locations. To earn points for conducive location, a place would need to have access, running water, electricity, a mobile network, and broadband. If there's already a house on the site, the more spacious the better. The quality of construction work will also guide you as to awarding the appropriate number of points. To earn points for conducive food supply, the location would need to be close to the market or a store selling food and supplies. To earn points for conducive personnel, the location would need to have neighbors who are respectable, upstanding, and of right view, such as, let's say, doctors or teachers. At the very least, those good neighbors will give us peaceful surroundings. In times of need, they will be able to help us. Finally, to earn points for conducive Dhamma, you would need to look for good schools for the children and good temples for adults, with monks passing by the location on alms round. The first worked example is that of Hillywood, which is liable to earth tremors, has plenty of job opportunities, has low crime rate, nearby markets, good free medical care, and monks passing on alms round. We'd give it 18 out of 25 for conducive location, 18 out of 25 for conducive food, 18 out of 25 for conducive personnel, and 25 out of 25 for conducive Dhamma. This would add up to 79% as a score for the Feng Shui conducive to spiritual development for Hillywood. To look at another worked example, we turn this time to Manhattan, which is infested with malarial mosquitoes, but has abundant food. It has no red light district nearby, but has schools and temples in the locality. It has a low crime rate. So, giving it marks for conduciveness, we'd give it 5 out of 25 for conducive location, 22 out of 25 conducive food, 21 out of 25 for conducive people, and 19 out of 25 for conducive Dhamma. This would add up to 67% as a score for Feng Shui, conducive to spiritual transformation for Manhattan. So when you add up the total points for each site, you should choose the locations with the maximum points for the site of your new house. So next time you move house, there's no need to consult a fortune teller or even a monk, because you're now armed with an understanding of the factors that make a site conducive for your spiritual studies during the habitation. So you can choose the site for a new house without anyone else's help. This is certainly a good example of Dhamma, which is immediately applicable to everyday life. Of course, Feng Shui is not all about selecting a conducive home. We have to work with what we already have to upgrade its conduciveness for spiritual transformation for everyone who lives there. In this connection, there are at least 4 ways which you can improve the Feng Shui of your home as a location conducive to good habits for yourself or for your family. Firstly, you need to give thought to your work-life balance so that you can spend enough time with your children to be able to instill them with goodness. Some people say that they are overburdened with work. However, if the reason for this is that you spend so much that you need it to afford to send your children to a private school, then think again. If you are left with no quality time for your children and they end up with an addiction as a result, you'll be spending all your money on rehab and summer camps for troubled teens instead. If, on the contrary, you can rearrange your time to give full attention to your children's upbringing, then your foray into parenthood will be rewarded many times over. Secondly, it's recommended with the tagline that the family that eats together stays together, that there ought to be at least 1 mealtime per day when the whole family sits down together. It is something that we will return to more in blessing number 12. However, in short, as a parent, you need to instill your child with virtue, and the whole family need to get to see each other across a dining table at least once a day in order to discuss Dhamma, instruct one another, and comment on the habits which each should be improving upon. In order to exemplify good habits you would like to see in your household, being together at mealtimes will provide this opportunity. Thirdly, especially in terms of the formation of good habits, you need to accept that money can't buy everything. Bringing up a child means more than just seeing that there is food on their plate. Lastly, it is recommended that the whole family does its daily chanting and meditation together. More recently, the whole idea of transforming our house to be more conducive has been examined in more detail by our teachers in Thailand. And the way they have concluded that we upgrade our homes as a place to cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path can be remembered as a 5x5 approach. There are 5 universal goodness habits to be cultivated and 5 categories of spaces in our home and our work lives where they need to be cultivated. The 5 universal goodness habits, which will be familiar to you by now, are cleanliness, tidiness, politeness, punctuality, and attention span. The 5 categories of spaces to practice universal goodness are our bedroom, bathroom, dining room, including the kitchen, living room, of course, dressing room, and our place of work. For example, when we use our bedroom, we should be punctual by having the habit of waking up on time each day. In conclusion, a conducive location has 4 factors: conducive location, conducive food supply, conducive personnel, and conducive Dhamma. If you put these 4 characteristics in order of importance, you will find that conducive Dhamma is the most important, followed by conducive personnel, followed by conducive food supply, with the conducive location being actually the least important of the 4. Even though location and food supply may not be ideal, but if the inhabitants are conducive, then they can soon improve the quality of the location and the food. However, the thing that makes the inhabitants conducive is having conducive Dhamma in their hearts and minds. This is the reason why conducive Dhamma is the most important attribute of the 4. As with the previous blessings, there are 2 different levels of description of conducive location. Up till now, we've talked exclusively about conducive location being around us in our surroundings. In such a case, the conduciveness of location will be determined by the 4 factors that we've already mentioned. Another possibility, however, which we've not yet considered, is that conducive location can also lie within. In fact, whether our interior condition is conducive or otherwise to the Dharma has even more influence on the quality of our well-being than our surroundings. What we mean by conducive location on the inside is a healthy body and mind, a body and mind that are in no way weakened or infected by any sort of disease. Even people born with all the advantages may take their health for granted and get mixed up with addictions. If instead they were able to uphold the precepts, they would be able to preserve and upgrade the quality of their internal conducive location. And this is why it's often said that if you take care of your precepts, then they will take care of you. So now that you know the 4 factors of conducive location, if you are still a child, you should settle for a location that is going to be conducive for your own education. If you are an adult, then you should try to make your location into a conducive location wherever you go. As an adult, it's not good enough simply to go looking for conducive locations. You should be working actively to improve the quality of the environment wherever you go. So I'd like to finish off with the story from the scriptures, which is taken again from the commentary to the Dhammapada. It's a story that comes from a time long before the time of the present Buddha, where the only Buddhas available were those who, although enlightened, were unable to teach for the benefit of the many folk. One of these so-called Pacceka Buddhas regularly came on alms round to the house of a herdsman. Having collected alms, the Pacceka Buddha would return to the forest to take his meal. He had to make the journey every day. So to save him repeated journeys, the herdsman invited the Pacceka Buddha to spend the rainy season near his own house and pledged to provide the midday meal every day. So he kept his promise and brought his lunch every day for the Pacceka Buddha, accompanied by his dog. Any day when the herdsman was not free to make the offering himself, he would send his well-trained dog to carry a tiffin set of food to offer to the Pacceka Buddha in his place. As the dog grew more familiar with the Pacceka Buddha, it took a liking to him because the deportment and manner of the Pacceka Buddha was so gentle. If the dog was at home and failed to bring firewood for its master, then he would get punished. By contrast, the Pacceka Buddha always treated him gently. The dog even liked to listen to the sound of the Pacceka Buddha doing his chanting. There was no risk of being beaten, and the Pacceka Buddha would even save a portion of the food to give to the dog. The dog became more and more familiar with the gentle manner of the Pacceka Buddha, and at the end of the rainy season, the Pacceka Buddha bid the herdsman goodbye and returned to the forest. The Pacceka made his journey by floating through the air, and the dog watched the Pacceka Buddha go with such regret that it howled mournfully. It was a sad farewell for the dog, who had the Pacceka Buddha still very much on its mind. In fact, the dog was so sad that it dropped dead with a broken heart. However, as a result of the faith of this dog in the Pacceka Buddha, and from howling at the departure of the Pacceka Buddha, the dog was reborn immediately as an angel called Gosaka in the 2nd level of heaven, whose duty it was to be the spokesman for the rest of the angels. In the time of the present Buddha, Gosaka was born in the human realm as Gosaka the merchant and was one of the greatest patrons of Buddhism. So it can be seen that the result of living in a conducive location and taking the chance to support a Pacceka Buddha led him from the lowly rebirth as a dog to rebirth first as an angel and then as an important patron of Buddhism. So for this session, I have introduced blessing number 4 on Buddhist Feng Shui to you. For my next live session online, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning, I'll move on to the 5th blessing on the topic of having accumulated merits in our past, which explains the important influence of past habits on our success in the present lifetime. For good measure, I would like to remind viewers that you can email your questions about meditation or what you've heard in the lecture to the email address as you can see spelled out in the slide, and I will do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to stay healthy, avoid recklessness or complacency in the face of the virus, maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you will be equipped to recognize and ameliorate the conducive locations in your life, both inside and outside. So for today, this is me, Phra Nicholas, signing off for now. So long